The death is the key to a lifelong and happy marriage, but it's not death as we might think. It's not death in the same way the blokes around me in my office at QR thought or have in mind that it is. It is the deaths of our individual selves. It's the death of single Jason, and it's the death of so I get to speak this morning, but I get to do it with my beautiful wife, Heidi. So she's a little bit nervous. Can we make her feel really welcome and appreciated?
Thanks, guys.
She's never done this before, but we are doing week 2 of this relationship series, and it's on marriage. And so we thought a cool way to tackle this might be to do this together and hear a bit of our journey together, and get stuck in to see what the Bible has to say about it.
We also wore matching outfits today because we're married. We didn't do it on purpose. But it's kind of cool anyway.
Yes. I'm shocking with any of this stuff, so Heidi's all over it. We just thought we'd get straight into it. This is Heidi and I on our wedding day. I see a couple of photos of us. As you can see, I was 12 and Heidi was 20. Now I'm 35 and Heidi's 27. That's the paradox of time. If you just ask Einstein, he'll sort that out for you.
Yeah, except in like 5 years' time, I'll probably look like I'm 60 and Jace will still look like he's 30 because that's just how guys seem to age. So thank you. No, seriously though, we met pretty young. We met back in high school, so that's why we got married young. This is a picture of us not long after we started dating. This was my 16th birthday. Jace was about 7 when I was 16.
I look like
what
such
are you
a child.
Doing? But so we've been together now for almost 20 years. We've been married for almost 14 years. And we have 4 beautiful kids. We have twin 10-year-olds. Here's our family now. On our recent holiday, we've got twin 10-year-olds, Isaiah and Bella Rose, an 8-year-old girl, Lily, and then a 7-year-old Jack. 7-year-old boy, Jack. So lots of people in this room have been married for a lot longer than we have, and we acknowledge that. And so for us, we're kind of just almost starting out on our journey together, but we've really loved it so far.
Yeah. Back when we got married, though, I was a Queensland Rail engineer, and so I was working in an office, and we'd got engaged. The next day, I come into the office, and I said to the guys, I'm like, hey, I've got some news. I'm engaged. I'm going to be married next year. And I remember clearly their reaction because it was unanimous. This was their reaction, roughly like this. What? Aren't you like 12? Seriously, what are you doing? A few more kind of expletive words in there that aren't probably too appropriate to share here. But they basically just said that. They're like, do you know what you're getting yourself into? Like, this is it. This is the end. It's all over. You are so done, mate. And they just, like, there wasn't even like a hint of a ha. It was like just back to their desks after that. They genuinely were like, what are you doing? I wanted to start there because I think our culture often makes out marriage to be the end. Makes it out to sort of be the end of the game, the end of the pursuit, the end of spontaneity, the end of romance, the end of freedom, even the end of love itself. And it's just kind of this big downhill slide. But then actually at the same time, right, so we've got this picture on one hand that culture has. On the other hand, culture loves celebrating the older couple that are walking down the street holding hands or having a cuddle or a little kiss even. Heidi loves that.
Yeah,
Heidi
I love
loves
it.
seeing that happen.
We see you, Colin and Marianne.
Beautiful. There's a lot of you out there that do this so well. It's lovely.
So, does anyone know the movie The Notebook? Yes, it's one of the greatest love story kind of movies of our time.
Heidi's favourite.
I cry every time. And I think this movie kind of captures that idea that there's this romantic and almost chaotic love story at the start, and it's messy, but it's amazing. And then there's this picture of the couple as they get older, and they're literally dying in each other's arms. We've got photos here to jog your memory. Dying in each other's arms, more in love than they've ever been before. But our culture kind of misses the middle section of the love story. We know that there's all this love and chaos at the start, but how do we actually progress And how do we keep that love and hold on to that love so that we end up like this happily ever after married couple, more in love than ever before at the end?
Yeah. Dan last week mentioned the Harvard study that's been going for 75 plus years now, started in 1938. This guy, George Valent, this psychiatrist at Harvard, released a paper only a few years ago on these guys that have studied over that time on their health and happiness. And he said that one of the findings were that the most important ingredient for meaning and happiness in life is loving relationships. But they actually found a whole bunch of other stuff, and I want to share an example from the study that I think is pretty telling on this topic of marriage. Here it is. It's going to be on the screen behind me. Overall, the study showed that a happy marriage is an incredibly positive thing in a man's life. What then makes for wedded bliss? Valent, that's the psychiatrist, Valent doesn't delve too much into that question, but holds up what is perhaps the most successful marriage in the study as an example. This couple, who Valent calls the Chips, a pseudonym, enjoyed doing various activities. They regularly sailed, took a yearly canoeing trip to Nova Scotia, and walked 3 miles a day together. They always kept a sense of humour about everything, and instead of resorting to passive aggression, husband and wife talked openly about their issues, and even conflict was filled with laughter. By the time this gentleman was 80, he and his wife had been giving their marriage rave reviews for 6 decades. "I've lived happily ever after," he gushed to his interviewer. Indeed, as Valent looked through his notes on him, he found he had written that Mr. Chips was perhaps the happiest man in the study. So today we're going to ask how. How do we do it? How do we get from the excitement of being newlyweds to the happy old couple in this story here saying, "I've lived happily ever after"? How do we do it?
So thankfully, it's not just our advice that you're listening to today. The Bible actually has answers about this, so that's what we're going to look at today. And we've decided to call this the key to marriage. Jason and I do a lot of pre-marriage counselling with couples that are about to get married, which we love. And there's probably 1,000 different keys that you could say are keys to a good marriage. We could tackle things today like good communication, like using strategies like learning to be gently assertive, expressing your needs and your wants. We could talk about becoming a really good listener, being quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger. We could talk about understanding your feelings with clarity and expressing them with confidence. So that's all communication. We could talk about healthy conflict resolution. Things like seeking first to understand before being understood. Put yourself in the other person's shoes. Starting sentences with "I feel" instead of "you" statements. You do this or you don't do this. Avoiding extreme language like always and never, like you always do this or you never do this. Identifying the problem that you're having and addressing it as a third-party issue, like coming together on working out the solution for this. These are all great, healthy conflict resolution ideas. We could talk about regular date nights. We could talk about regular sex. We could talk about the power of forgiveness and the ongoing pursuit of each other. These are all amazing keys for a successful marriage. And I bet if you talk to a lot of other people in this room that have been married for a lot longer than we have, they would have a lot of other awesome keys and nuggets of wisdom as well.
Yeah. And the Bible speaks to all of these things, but we thought we don't have 7 weeks to talk about this, right? We could do this over a long period of time. We just wanted to boil it down to if it was just one thing that the Bible has to say about marriage that we could take away that kind of shapes everything else, then what is this key? So we're going to investigate it. We're going to take a look through a whole bunch of verses and try and land on it together. And we'll start at John 10:10. It'll be on the screen behind me. Jesus said this. He said, "The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full." That word "have" there in reference to having the full life at the end of the sentence there. That word is ekosin in Greek, and it's a present active verb. So the Greek is the original language of this text. It's the present active verb. So it's not referencing a one-day full life on the other side of eternity. It's saying Jesus has come that humanity, can have full life now and ongoing. This full life we can access now. But how do we get this? Jesus gives us a hint in Matthew 16:25. He says, "Whoever wants to save their life or find their life will lose it. But whoever loses their life for me will find it." So the full life is found in losing it. But in case there's a kind of bit of ambiguity on what he's saying there, he actually makes it very clear, the verse before, what he's talking about. In verse 24, he says, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. Where was Jesus going with this cross? He's going to die. This cross was his literal instrument of death that he took up and he carried up the hill to die on. And so the path Jesus is saying to full life that he offers is actually through death. But it doesn't end there. Death isn't just like this partial thing. If we take death seriously, it's absolute. It's across the board. You can't die to just some things in life and not the others. And so I think this is where Jesus picks up on this a few chapters later in Matthew 19, verses 4 to 6. He says, haven't you read, he replied, that at the beginning the Creator made them male and female and said, for this reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. They're no longer two people. They're a new entity. They're a new single unit. And just to really drive it home, Paul, who writes a bunch of the letters in the New Testament, he specifically picks up on this idea for us in Ephesians 5, verse 25. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Again, going back to the Greek, that just as in Greek is kai kathos, which actually means, or in kind of expanding it out, means according to the same manner in which. So in other words, the path to full life in marriage, if we're following Jesus, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, the full path to marriage, the path to full life in marriage is through death. That's what I'm trying to say there. Hey, I got there. Yeah, thank you. We got there. The path to full life in marriage is death. And if there's any doubt, just to be clear, if there's any doubt that Paul was just talking about the blokes here, because he says, husband, love your wives, just as Christ, etc. He says a few verses earlier, just to be clear, he says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Submit to one another. Do it for each other. In the same manner Jesus did it for us, we must die to each other. So the key to a long-lasting, happily ever after marriage is death. Sounds like we're being a bit provocative, right? A bit facetious, like I've tried to build a case just to lead to something that's a little bit like, hang on, what? It's a bit unusual, like a bit silly even. We're being deadly serious. Pardon the pun. Heidi said sneak a dad joke in there. There you go. The death is the key to a lifelong and happy marriage, but it's not death as we might think. It's not death in the same way the blokes around me in my office at QR thought or have in mind that it is. It is the deaths of our individual selves. It's the death of single Jason, and it's the death of single Heidi.
So you might have heard this idea before if you've been going to church or you've been around church circles for a little while. And it's pretty tough, like when it actually plays out, right? So why is that? Because it's counterintuitive at two different levels, and I'm just going to talk about that now. So firstly, we're raised towards independence. We are born, we learn to walk, we learn to talk, we learn to dress ourselves, we go to school, we learn how to study and make friends and be social, and then you might get your driver's license, you have to buy a car, you need to get a job and save money, and all of these things, all of a sudden you become this adult that's off and racing on your own in the world. You're an independent human. That's the way you've been trained and raised your whole life, and that's a good thing, but that's just how our society works. And the whole journey of that story is independence. So that's our internal narrative, is becoming independent. And secondly is the external narrative. So culture's narrative to us is self-actualization. And Dan actually mentioned this last week, where he said we're all being discipled by something. We're all being led by something. And culture's message leads us in this direction towards self-focus, self-achievement, self-importance, just yourself. You do what makes you happy, what you want to do in life, what makes you feel good, and that includes things like getting married as well. But death is not just counterintuitive, it's awful. Especially in Australian culture, it's hidden away a lot. It's hidden in hospitals or nursing homes. It's prolonged and postponed, and it's the opposite to life. It's the opposite to this self-actualization. It's anti-self. And so death of our individual selves as the key to marriage doesn't really sound right. It doesn't sound good. And it's actually a really hard thing to do. But I think it's the absence of this truth, the absence of the death of single Heidi and the death of single Jason, that can lead to a lot of unhappy marriages and then a lot of separated marriages.
Yeah. But this is often how God's kingdom starts out, doesn't it? It's this sort of backward, upside down, inside out, even wrong, sometimes feels impossible sort of way that it works out. But it's often then, as we decide to try it out, we decide to just give it a go, that we actually find that it was the path, it was the right path all the way along. It was the full life that Jesus promised. And I think marriage is no different. But still how? Like, how do we actually do that? We still have this question, how do we practically die to each other in marriage? How do we embrace this concept of death in marriage, death of our single selves for the sake of a great marriage? Again, H and I talked quite a lot about this and reading through the Bible and landing on a whole bunch of things, but we kind of boiled it down to one, reflecting on a little bit on our own life as well, on our own journey. We kind of boiled it down to one thing as really the place where it all begins. One thing that when we start putting new habits and practices in this area, it helps us die to ourselves in order to get this best marriage, this full marriage that Jesus talks about. The key is earlier in Ephesians. There's a few verses earlier where, not often sort of linked, but I think sort of Paul links it to a bunch of things he's saying after this. It gives us this one thing, this one insight. It's in verses 15 and 16. Be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. In the New King James Version, so a different English version of the Bible, different translation, instead of that phrase, making the most of every opportunity, it uses the words, redeeming the time. Redeeming the time. So Paul is telling us that in order to die to ourselves, we must carefully examine how we use our time, as wise people do. He says that here. So dying to yourself begins with this concept of redeeming time.
All right, I'm going to share a story now about Jace. Love you, but we're going to slay you. Jace loves being active, which is great. He's almost a bit hyperactive if you know anything about him. Sometimes it's a lot, but he particularly loves playing sport. And early on when we got married, we used to both work in the city, and he would come home and he'd often finish work earlier than me, so he would go back to his parents' house, and he's got 3 younger brothers. He was the first to get married out of all of them, first to leave home. And so he would go back home and play sport with them in the afternoon, I don't know, play cricket or whatever you did. And then that was great because I knew that he needed that outlet in his life. But then it's kind of started happening a lot. And when I didn't work late, we'd come home together and then he'd still just like, see you later. And so, yeah, he was even doing it when I was around.
Yeah, I loved it. It was great. I love sport. And my brothers love sport. Like, we just grew up living and breathing sport. So I'd go around and we'd kick a footy or play backyard cricket. And I reflect on it now, I'm like, I was 21. I don't know that sort of works, but anyway, I loved it. I loved cricket. And I thought what was worse than that was actually real cricket on a Saturday afternoon. So into marriage, I just continued playing cricket. I was like, well, this is just what we're going to do. Saturday afternoons are write-off every week. I'm going to be playing cricket with my brothers. And it's dead set. It's men's warehouse cricket in like the northern parts of Brisbane on a Saturday afternoon for 5-6 hours in the hot sun for 5 or 6 hours. Like it's a slog, and it's cricket. If you know cricket. So Heidi's just coming to these games, and she graciously started scoring our games. I think it's actually because she's just bored, but she doesn't say that. She's very kind.
I actually liked it. I liked being involved.
I wouldn't be surprised if she hated it, but she said she loved it. She came along. We share these stories because what I hadn't yet understood was that time was not mine anymore. It wasn't mine. My schedule was no longer mine. Like, I needed to lay down my calendar so that we could work together. Which, going in, is like, yes, obviously. But in reality, I think that is such a difficult thing to play out in marriage. And what I see, and I think we see around us, is this difficulty of dying to ourselves in the sense that time is mine. Time really is still mine. It's not easy. I think this is one of the keys. We live in this fast-paced, everything in our fingertips world that leaves us short on time. And so we have this added pressure. Like I'd say, if looking around this room, I'd say most of us here, if we have top 3 things we wish we had more of, time has got to be in them. Maybe money and health would be up there too, but time would have to be in there. I wish I had more time. But here's the thing. Here's where we wanted to land. Here's why we want to talk about this. And here's what I think Paul is getting at in this little passage here. Who is the commander of our time? Like, who is actually the boss of our time? We are, right? We are the boss of our time. So we can actually do something about this. We can do something about this ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah. There was a period in our lives where we were not very good at this at all. We actually sucked at it. At the end of 2012, Jace had been working full-time for a couple of years for the church. He was studying part-time his master's, and we'd just given birth to twins, so that was also very full-on, and this church had pretty much imploded at that time, and so we were getting very little sleep, and we had zero time, but we didn't stop. We didn't take that as signs of, you should probably slow down. We didn't take any kind of drastic action steps. We just battled along and we just slogged it out. And as the years unfolded, and God was obviously very gracious, and he grew this church again, we had our 3rd and 4th kids. Jace kept studying his master's and working full time, and I was just plugging away, looking after little kiddies. Jace finally finished his master's at the end of 2019. Woo! And at the same time, we were kind of finishing up the baby stage. We were changing the last of our nappies. And we basically just crawled into 2020, just absolutely cooked, absolutely exhausted. And in 2021, Jace took some long service leave and some unpaid leave. And we actually did a 6-month lap around Australia, which was amazing. And I think it was only then that by stepping out, we actually realized just how exhausted we were.
Yeah. Yeah, it really was. I think it's easy through that period it was easy to blame it all on the busy season that it was. It was easy just to use that as the excuse. The necessity of work, the importance of study, extracurricular church stuff that's necessary, all of the parenting things that go with parenting. We all just kind of, we assumed. I think we just assumed. There was a subconscious assumption that all of these things were important and they were necessary. We didn't actually do what Paul was saying here. We didn't stop and examine our time and look to redeem it for the sake of our marriage. We weren't careful, as Paul puts it. And I think to an extent we all do this. I think to an extent we all assume. We all assume that we are important, that our own goals are important, that our downtime's important, that our hobbies are important, that our work's important, that all of these things are important. We assume, therefore, that they're almost necessary. They're necessary, and to the extent that we do them, they are necessary, when actually maybe they're not. And I think carefully examining our time is what begins this dying process. We start to realize that a lot of what we assumed to be important and necessary is actually not. And we begin redeeming this time. We begin redeeming the time for our marriage. And here's the thing that we maybe don't assume so quickly. Our marriage relationships, after our relationships with Jesus, with our loving Father, with God, they are the most important that we have. That's an assumption that for some reason I think it's cultural. We miss it. We lay down our lives for each other, just as Jesus did for the church. That was his whole mission, his priority, all the way through in God's kingdom. And so our marriage is that reflection of God's kingdom as we do the same thing. We reflect God's kingdom in that way. It's our priority. So, we sort of landed on, we wanted to be practical with this. We're going to go, what did that look like for us? And what could it look like for you if you find yourself in the same boat, needing to redeem time for your marriage? We've come up with a bit of a list of questions. They're tough questions, but we think it kind of begins this process. They'll require serious answers. They'll require serious time given to them to sit and think on them. But if you wanted to try something this week, you can start ripping out your phones now because they're all going to be on the screen behind me. And they're just questions we thought through and came up with together, but there'll be a bunch of other questions that you could ask yourselves as well to start to reflect on this and give it some time. They're going to be behind me, but welcome to take photos or notes. Do I need to work more than 45 hours per week? Could I work less even? How much money do I really need to earn? Should I find another job? Like actually do it. Like if that's what it's going to take. Should I find another job? How much of my self-esteem is wrapped up in what I do? In my title, my role? Do we need to move closer to school or work to cut down on travel time? How important to me is the type of house or suburb I live in and why? How much time do I need to be at the gym? Do I need to look like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson? Don't do that. I wish. How much time do I need exercising or playing sport or gaming or streaming? Are there other ways to do these things? Like, can we do some of these things together? Redeem the time together. How much time do I use on screens? And what if that's necessary? What if that is wasted? What things should our kids be involved in? Why? How many hours in the week do those things take up? And do they add or take away from our relationships with each other and with them? What things should I be training up my kids to do themselves? Like chores or other things that help them to sort themselves out and redeem time. What are my or our weekly patterns of work and rest? Are they balanced? Are they balanced reasonably? What can be expected, knowing that work is busy? What are my or our seasonal patterns of holidays? Are they effective in rejuvenating ourselves and our relationship? Are there enough holidays in our calendar? What are the non-negotiables? This is key. What are the non-negotiables in my calendar? And how much time do they take? And why are they non-negotiables? And are those reasons solid? That's almost where to start, I think. It's a bit like budgeting, right? You either increase your income or you decrease your expenses to create savings, to redeem money, as it were. But you can't create more time, can you? You have a limited amount. There's no creating more time. So you can only decrease your activities to purchase time, to redeem time. And so as you answer these questions in order to create these time savings, you'll find that you'll find this process to actually be the dying process. It's the dying to your self-image, the dying to your wealth, the dying to your self-importance, the dying to your desires, your personal fulfillment. It is the very process of dying. It's the outworking of that process. Ruthlessly, I've put this in capital letters and bold here, ruthlessly redeem time. Ruthlessly redeem it. This is the beginning of the journey towards a happy and lifelong marriage.
Now, we are definitely not experts at this. As I shared earlier, we were not very good at this. And we really only properly started doing it during our trip away in 2021. We began examining our time, and it was actually a really hard process to practically go through examining your calendar. So after we'd redeemed some of our time, we ended up putting in a bunch of things in place for us that have begun to help us significantly in our marriage and in our family's life. Obviously, these things aren't rules to go by. They're just our example. But hopefully there's some helpful ideas in here of just how we made these steps practical. And again, this is just our current attempt to die to each other, our single lives, for the sake of our marriage by redeeming time. So these are just a few examples of what we have done, and they'll be up on the screen. We moved close to school and work, so we both have a 5-minute commute to school and work. And we increased our mortgage to do that, but that was a choice that we made because we valued the time. We found a job for me that was close to home and only school hours and part-time because we just valued that 3 days per week, even though it was lower paying than a lot of other jobs I've had in the past. We block out 2 nights per week of family time. We block out 1 night per week or maximum of 2 for church stuff. We block out 1 night a fortnight or sometimes per week for larger family gatherings. We block out a date night or time per week, and this is like all the people with kids in the room are like, no, we can't do that. That doesn't mean you get babysitting and you go out for a meal and all that kind of stuff. It's literally just claiming 3 or 4 hours of time, just the two of you. And I know that's really hard with kids. We've been through that journey as well, but just ruthlessly redeem that time together. We have dinner together as a family every possible night. On Sunday mornings, we all come to church as a family, and then Jace is here on Sunday nights for work. Jace does an hour of sport per week. He'd probably love to do 554 hours. And then other exercise split up throughout the week as well. We have a shared calendar, and the calendar is our rule. Everything goes into that calendar, and we literally block out, like all of these things that we've shared, we literally block them out in our calendar. So we will have exercise time and family time and all of that kind of stuff. We automate decision making where we can, because decisions take up time and energy, and if you want to talk to Jace about that, he would love to talk to you about it because he loves a good automation. And we just put other systems and rules in place to avoid unnecessary conflict around money management, agreed practices, and agreed responsibilities as well. And then we've also trained our kids to do bulk daily chores.
It's coming, parents.
Yeah.
It's coming.
They do the dishes and they make their lunches, because again, that is redeeming those times, so you're not there at 9 o'clock at night making sandwiches. And these things are working pretty well for us at the moment. But we know as our kids grow and as seasons change and life changes, we'll have to be revisiting these things and these decisions all the time.
Yeah, definitely. And look, this obviously isn't a rule at all. This is completely tailored to our situation. So each of you will need to look back at those questions if you wanted to explore this for yourself, or just open up a discussion about it together as a family and find out what patterns and practice can we put in place if we're trying to do this sort of redeeming time thing. And we have a long way to go to get it right, and I think we'll have to constantly examine our schedule and change it. But yeah, we wanted to share that with you, just open up a little bit of kind of the journey we've been on ourselves, I guess. Recently I heard a story of a couple. It was encouraging. It was tough but encouraging. It was this couple that had been spiraling downwards for quite some time. They barely acknowledged each other when they saw each other. They were like ships in the night, even when they did see each other. Their whole lives were just kind of communicating at the surface level, just about the jobs, the things you had to do, and conflict was just normal. Just because you're just not having that time together, conflict just became something that was leaving their marriage on the rocks. And one day the husband just broke down in the shower. He realised he couldn't do anything to change his wife, and he was sad for his marriage. But he realised in a moment, maybe it was God, maybe it's just his own thoughts. He's like, I can do something about this. That's the only thing that can happen in this, in fact, is that I can do something. And so the next day he asked his wife, he said, how can I make your day better? Just asked that question. She was surprised, skeptical, a bit suspicious. And she was like, all right, you can clean the kitchen. And so he did. And he cleaned the kitchen. And the next day he came and asked her the same thing. He said, how can I make your day better? And she, again, challenged him. She's like, okay, the garage is a mess, so how about you clean the garage? That'd be great. And so he did. It was a huge job, but he cleaned it all up, nice and tidy. And he did this every day for 2 weeks. He just thought, I've just got to keep asking this question. So every day he said, how can I make your day better? And finally, at the end of this 2-week period, the wife said, nothing. Why don't we just spend some time together? If you've got the time, let's just spend it together. How had he done this? He'd done it by dying to himself, to his own desires, to his own schedule, to his own plans. Because to ask this question, he must have first known that he can follow through, or he would not have bothered asking. Or at least to an extent he could have followed through. And so he has decided, you know what? I'm going to put all that aside. I'm going to finish work earlier. I'm not going to go out with my friends. I'm not going to game. I'm not going to binge. I'm just going to put that time aside and see what happens with it for the sake of their marriage. Ephesians 5:15 and 16. Be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity, redeeming the time, because the days are evil. Good communication, healthy conflict resolution, regular sex, pursuing your spouse, all of these things, they are great things and they are the elements of a healthy marriage. But they all require practice. And practice takes time. Without time, all of these things suffer. And so, to redeem time, we must die to ourselves. This is the key to a lifelong and happy and healthy marriage. Can we just pray for you guys? Is that all right? Let's just bow our heads, close our eyes, hey? God, what an incredible blessing and privilege marriage is, to not be alone. It is not good for us to be alone. You've created humanity for relationships and community, and what better one is there than a marriage that's going well? And what better reflection of your kingdom than to see love laid down, love of, the other, for this, putting ourselves down for the sake of the other, God. That is the picture of your kingdom, because that was you, Jesus. That was you going to the cross in our place. And I pray that that would be what's in our hearts and minds as we leave this place. Not a challenge of something that's hard to get to, but the God who has done it before and has done it for us, has died for us so that we can die to ourselves. We will not be left in the lurch. We will not be left without love, because we have a God who is unconditionally loving us, and would we pass that on? And as we both do that, God, would that lead to the fullest marriages? I pray that for this room. I pray that for anyone struggling, anyone going, great God, would you continue to work in those places, prompt and encourage as you do so patiently, God. And would this concept of redeeming time become something that is worked into life? It becomes a pattern. It becomes a ritual, a practice to review it and redeem it for the sake of our marriages and for the sake of our kids, God, for those of us with kids. So Jesus, we leave it all with you. We thank you again. We know that you go with us. You're a good God, and we celebrate you today. Amen.
Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that. If you did and you want more Lifepoint content, subscribe to our channel right now. Or if you're in the area around Moreton Bay or Rothwell, head to our service. Sunday, we'd love to see you there. lifepoint.org.au for all the details. We'll see you soon.